So earlier this morning, Devondre Campbell shared this tweet. He said, "Not going out of my way anymore, and I'm not playing through injuries anymore because when bleep goes wrong, they always use it against you. I'm treating everyone accordingly and giving them the same energy they given me. Focus on yourself and your mental 59. You owe it to yourself." So I already made a short video breaking down this tweet from earlier this morning, but I wanted to come and do a live stream just because I want to see what people are thinking and see, who you believe Devondre Campbell is potentially talking about, because I think right now all you can do is speculate unless he actually is to come out and say exactly what he's thinking and exactly who he's talking about, the people who he's trying to talk to here. But I would love to hear what your thoughts are, because I think that there's a few differing opinions right now, and I think just the fact that the Packers defense right now and just the state of everything with Joe Barry, with the the discontent with Joe Barry and what has happened here, especially these past 2 weeks with his defense, this sort of just throws more fuel to the fire that just there's some things not going well in Green Bay. And if he is actually calling out the coaches, then that's pretty, I would be shocked if he would do that publicly, but maybe he's talking about the fans. And that's why I want to hear what some of you have to say. So Evan209 says, Joe Barry got to go ASAP. Austin says he is terrible, like at the 0-16 Browns. Jones says, fire Joe Barry. Packers are better without him. Jacob says, Campbell is a good person, so I don't think he would come out and say this if there wasn't something going on in that locker room with the whole defense. Yeah, that's the thing, because, regardless, this causes questions for the Packers and their defense, and the fact that, we don't know who he's talking about. We don't know what's going on here. It does make people wonder, are things going wrong in the locker room with the defense? Is there some discontent with the coaching situation? It's hard to know exactly what's happening, but clearly Devondre Campbell does not feel like he needs to play through injury anymore, and I guess he's been playing through an injury. And I'm guessing it's because he had a pretty bad performance. It did not go well, and odds are that from this tweet, it sounds like he was playing through an injury, and he doesn't want to do it anymore. And I don't know if this is something, maybe it's about his future. Maybe he is worried that if he keeps playing through this injury, maybe the Packers, maybe other teams could think that he no longer has it. He's 30 years old, and so maybe he wants to save himself here for the future and not make people think that he's a bad player just because he is playing through injury. And I was looking at his PFF grades. I was just curious to see some of his stats this morning. In his first 9 games, he had grades all like in the mid-70s, high 70s. And then week 10 on, he's been a lot worse. And so I wonder exactly what injury he could be playing through, because I don't think he was even on the injury report this past week. Dean says Joe is losing the locker room. I think that's a possibility. I definitely think that's a possibility. Sydney's Pop says, can you imagine if they lose to Carolina? I'm going to the game, so I hope they can pull it out. Yeah, I think against Bryce Young, against the Panthers, who have struggled a lot this season, if things went really, really poorly there, clearly that just makes things worse and worse. But I do feel like that this, at the time right now, the Packers defense is at a pretty low point, probably one of the lowest points it's been in a very long time after that performance. Evan says, exactly. I'm sure the past few weeks he and Quay have been getting ripped a new one in film study after games, and he thinks it's more on the coaches and preparation than himself. I think that's a possibility. I was just watching a short film breakdown from Dan Orlovsky showing one play in the Packers defense early in the game. I think it was like a 3rd and 4, and I think Mike Evans and one other receiver on one side. The Packers basically are playing coverage over there with 4 guys, and then there's 3 receivers on the other side, and I think there was like one guy covering 3. I need to find that exact Dan Orlovsky tweet. But basically, Dan Orlovsky's point was, these guys are not being put in the right position. And I wonder how often that happens. And I do wonder if there's any of that going on here with Devondre Campbell's tweet. And that's why I said in the video I posted earlier today, it is speculation. We don't know who he's talking about. He could be talking about the coaches. He could be talking about the fans. We honestly just have no idea who he's talking about. But it does make you wonder. And I also know that there's been discussion about Jair Alexander, and I haven't really touched too much on it because, he's been injured and he hasn't been playing. And I guess you do wonder with NFL players, because I know lots of guys play through injuries. People talk about how near the end of the season, every single NFL player is banged up and playing through something. And, You would assume, though, there comes a point where you're so injured and you're not able to play at the level you are used to playing at and what you think you should be able to play at. And if you're going to, go out there and your injury's going to affect you enough to where you're not playing good football and you're getting beat all the time, then I think at that point you shouldn't be playing. And I guess Devondre Campbell, I don't know who was pushing him to play. I don't know if it was, maybe was he pushing himself to play and then decided actually maybe this isn't a good idea. Was it the coaches pushing him to play? And now he's rethinking this after, a bad showing on Sunday. It's hard to know for sure. Cindy says hire Al Harris as defensive coordinator. I have seen that idea fly around. I think on the one hand, it is interesting when you hire former players as defensive coordinators because I do think they bring some kind of energy to the team where I feel like there could be a buy-in from players if you bring in a former Packer player. I honestly just don't know. I know, Al Harris was a great defensive player here on the Packers. I don't know enough about him as a coach. I need to investigate more as to, what he could potentially bring to the Packers as a coordinator. But I do like the aspect of a former player because I do think there could be a switch of energy. And that's why I think that, when it comes to making a defensive coordinator change, there's no doubt I feel like there would be a boost of energy for this team just when you've had 3 years of inconsistency. And, there's been good times. There was a stretch of games against the Lions, Chiefs where it was like, well, we're playing good enough to beat teams like this. Maybe this will be fine. Maybe this will be, be enough to get the job done. But then when the inconsistency rears its ugly head once again, then you're like, I don't know. And so I do think because it's year 3, I do think that a change would bring lots of new energy to this defense. We do only have 3 games left, though, so maybe LaFleur doesn't want to switch things up when there's only 3 games remaining. Who knows if he has a good solution to fix this right now. Let's look at some more comments. Evan says, let's see. Or Jacob says fans are going after Jair too. Evan 209 says, I must have saw Devondre one-on-one with Chris Godwin on 50% of third downs. Yeah, I think there were some mismatches there. If we look at PFF, they said that he allowed 3 receptions for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. But it's tough if you're Devondre Campbell to have to line up against Chris Godwin. That's definitely a mismatch. Jones says the defense would be way better if Joe Barry wasn't our coordinator. Perfector, thoughts on Jim Leonard for possible TC? I don't know. I need to go investigate and see the potential options at defensive coordinator. But I do think that there have to be better options out there than Joe Barry. I just looking at Matt LaFleur's press conference yesterday where he's saying, 3rd and 4, playing soft coverage, that shouldn't be happening. It's been happening for 3 seasons now. And for whatever reason, that can't seem to be fixed. I don't know if Joe Barry just doesn't want to do that because I feel like that's a pretty simple fix. Like if LaFleur doesn't like the way it's being called, I know he probably has to give Barry, the reign. If you hire a defensive coordinator, you don't want to have to micromanage him. Where LaFleur, his thing is the offense. He probably tries to give Joe Barry free reign. But when things keep happening, either you have to insert yourself and say, you can't call that anymore if you don't think it's a good idea as a head coach. You got to, put your foot down and be like, we're not doing that anymore. Or you have to find a new defensive coordinator who, would do what you want to do. And so if Joe Barry consistently doesn't do what Matt LaFleur thinks is good for a defense, then either, Matt LaFleur needs to tell him to make the changes and see if they happen, or make a change at defensive coordinator, which LaFleur isn't right now. We don't know. It's hard to tell if LaFleur is just trying to stick with Barry for the rest of the season because he doesn't think there's a better option right now with only 3 games remaining, because obviously if you bring in a new guy, you try to change things up. There could be a period of trying to figure things out and, a new potential defense. But, it can't be much worse than it's been the past 2 weeks. So that's really the thing. You really don't have that much to lose if you make a change, because if things go bad, they are already going bad. So that's where I think making a change makes more sense. But, I talked about it yesterday. In the past, LaFleur hasn't fired coaches or let go of coaches in season. I do wonder if he's waiting just till after the season. But at the same time, too, there's a part of me that thinks, is he actually thinking that this can be solved with Joe Barry here? Does he actually think that even if the final 3 games, let's say they go well, could he be convinced again that Joe Barry should stay? I wouldn't be shocked if he was convinced Joe Barry should stay. I wouldn't be shocked just based on what we've seen in the past. LaFleur wanting to keep him around again this year. But at the same time, it's possible that LaFleur knows in his mind he's going to fire or he's going to let go of Barry at the end of the season. That's a possibility, but you wouldn't come out and say things, in that way until you wouldn't publicly, go after Barry until, you probably let him go and, sort of say those kinds of things. Colin says, how we spend all our first rounders on defense and they all can't tackle. Yeah, there is a question about the way obviously on the one hand you have Joe Barry, the other hand you have the players who need to play well, but I don't think they're being put in the best positions. I think that clearly there's issues with the defense. Yesterday just talking about how Matt LaFleur was saying there's so many communication issues, and that's one thing too I want to touch on with this Devondre Campbell tweet, which I've seen. I was looking at some of my comments from my past video breaking down the situation, and there were a few different people who thought that maybe Devondre Campbell is upset that LaFleur yesterday was saying there's communication errors and the plays aren't properly getting, I guess, shared with the rest of the defense when Devondre Campbell, is the guy there with the green dot in his helmet getting the plays directly from Joe Barry. Some people were speculating that potentially Campbell felt betrayed by Matt LaFleur because he's saying the communication is a problem, and maybe that was inferring that Devondre Campbell is the problem. Don't know. That's just speculation. Some people in the comments. Curious to hear what you guys would think about that one. But I think just all in all, to have this tweet come out, it's not good. It's not good for the Packers defense. I get if Devondre Campbell is trying to help himself. I understand that because, when it comes to his future, if he's playing through a tough injury and let's say the Packers were to let him go after this season, not saying they will, but if, he probably wants other teams to know that he was playing through an injury, and that's maybe why he's struggling and he's not being put in the best position. So, Mr. Death, what's up? Haven't seen you in a while. If we fire Mike McCarthy, or if we fire McCarthy, we can sure fire Joe Barry. I agree with that. Jacob B., it's pretty crazy that we went from beating two of the best teams in the NFL to this in just a couple weeks. I know, it's just how that happens. It's crazy to see it happen. You would have hoped it wouldn't, but it has. J1538, no one is getting fired this year. Management isn't going for a run. Yeah, they could just be waiting till the season ends and then potentially move on. Beast Bumblebee, I don't blame Campbell for his bad game. You can't expect him to guard Chris Godwin, LOL. They had him on Godwin way too much. No, I would agree with that. Mismatch there. J1538, until after next year when dead cap is off. Beast says, I think tackling is on the coaching, though. Yeah, in a sense, when you look at Packers or players' performances, sure, you need you guys to follow assignments, but at some point, when you get to like this point in the season, Matt LaFleur says they're not executing basic principles, I think that has to fall on the defensive coordinator, right? If you're not executing basic principles, sure, your players need to execute them, but at what point does it fall on the leader whose job is to get them to execute the basic principles? You know what I mean? Mr. Death says, I feel like Alexander is sitting out because of Joe Barry and Alexander being full participation. I think he is done with Joe Barry like Campbell is done with Joe. That's a possibility. It's all speculation. And, when you look at Jair, yesterday Matt LaFleur said there was a miscalculation when it came to how long Jair would be out, because I think he's missed, 6 straight games, which would now mean maybe the Packers should have put him on IR and freed up a roster spot. But Matt LaFleur, when asked yesterday, said that there was a miscalculation with his injury. So I fully get why there's questions with Jair. And, now with Devondre Campbell saying this, maybe other players in the Packers locker room feel the same way. We don't know. But it's speculation, but things aren't looking great. Dean says, any chance Belichick would step down and take a DC job next year? I feel like he'd become a head coach somewhere else. Someone out there would be willing to give him a head coach job. There's no doubt. He's one of the greatest coaches of all time. One team would be willing to give Bill Belichick a job, in my opinion. So I don't see why he'd need to go down to become a defensive coordinator. Even though it will be interesting to have Belichick in Green Bay, I just don't see that happening. Robert, if they are not goons, fire JB, then move him down to the sideline, get him to yell, fight something, then being all cozy in his box. I mean, he was on the field the last 2 seasons. He went up to the box. It was working for a while. Maybe they need to switch it up, bring some energy to the sideline. Who knows? Here we have, let's see. Bottom line, we wasted the prime of our D these past 3 years. Some of that. I mean, Joe Barry, players won't be mentally in the game when they believe in the scheme, period. Yeah, because I was listening to, Wilde and Tausch. I think they have a radio show, in Wisconsin. And they were bringing back up the fact that, remember last year, the first game where Jair was frustrated after the game that he wasn't following Justin Jefferson, seemed to be unsatisfied with the way the scheme was being run, and he was being asked to do certain things. And I do wonder if that's carried over, and that same thought is here right now in Green Bay, because as I shared earlier, with Dan Orlovsky, he had a nice breakdown this morning on Twitter, basically saying these guys aren't in the right, like they're not being put in a position to succeed, at least on one certain play. So the players have to feel the same way, because when you're getting gashed all the time and things aren't going well, I do wonder what the players are thinking and if this has anything to do with Joe Barry. We don't know for sure. Wesley says Barry's for sure getting fired. I would say, we'll see how the final 3 games go. Because I'm in the boat that I think that Joe Barry should be fired. I think that in 3 seasons, it hasn't been enough, especially with the inconsistency coming back the past 2 weeks. It just happens time and time again. So I think this is one time too many, maybe even more times too many than it should have been. And with that being the case, I think he should go. I do really wonder, though, if this defense had crazy performances the final 3 games, I honestly think LaFleur could be convinced to keep him again. But I think that would be a really bad idea for Matt LaFleur, because I think his job would be on the line fully, especially if next season we come in, start stinking, and the defense doesn't play well. Then it's like, how did you let this happen again? Because it's already happened maybe once, and if it happens again, I think LaFleur don't you guys think LaFleur probably has to know that, his job could be on the line if Barry stays around and the defense continues to play poorly? Not for the next 3 games. Like, I don't think that, the Packers move on from LaFleur just because he doesn't fire Barry right now. I think after the season, if he doesn't, and the next season the Packers came in, the defense had struggled again, at that point, it's like, well, LaFleur is the leader of this team. At some point you have to make a decision. XL96VIZ says, coaching staff is losing the buy-in of the defensive players. I think that's very possible. I think that is very possible. Joseph says, I'm really starting to think these players have been bringing forward their thoughts and concerns to LaFleur about Barry and have not been heard. I think things are about to get really bad. Possibly. And that's the thing with this tweet. Who is he talking about? Who do you guys think he's talking about? Fans? Because there's no doubt when players have bad games, they get lots of flack from fans. And it could be that he's talking about fans. I almost prefer he's talking about fans, because then it's like there's less problems in the Green Bay locker room. Because if this is about the coaches and them wanting him to play and he's like, I'm not playing anymore, even though you want to be pushed through, that's where things are a lot more troublesome in the Packers locker room. So I hope that's not the case. I hope he's talking about the fans here. Will he get clarification? I don't know. But he had to know this would cause a stir on social media, but he felt the need to share it. Mr. Death says, Matt is taking all communications with defense, which I feel like that's Joe Barry's job, which if he can't have communications with players, then why are you defensive coordinator? Matt should be on the hot seat. Yeah, I do think that if Matt LaFleur has to go in and help with communication for basic concepts, as he was discussing yesterday, then I'm not sure you have the proper leader on your leading the defense. Ice HV says, if our defense has lost hope in Joe, it's time for him to get out. Crazy Matt said he didn't plan on making a change. Maybe this starts a player movement and it happens sooner rather than later. It's possible. Wesley says he has to fire him. They never do it in the season. Yeah, LaFleur hasn't done that. He hasn't let go of anyone during the season. He let go of Pettin after the season. He let go of the other 2 special teams coordinators after the season. But I don't think things have ever been this bad. Because there's definitely been people, the idea of firing Joe Barry out there for a long time. But I've never seen it this bad. Never. It's never been worse. Jacob says, I started watching football in 2013, and I haven't seen a good Packers defense ever. I've watched the 2010 Packers Super Bowl run so many times. I want to see something like that. live just once. Yeah, and I think that to get this defense to that level, you got to start fresh. It's been too long with Joe Barry. Beast says, do we think Joe Barry is losing the locker room or Matt LaFleur is, or both? I personally still believe in LaFleur, but obviously not Barry. It's hard to know. It's hard to know because obviously we can speculate that they're losing the locker room, but we don't really know. We don't know what's going on here. And if Devondre Campbell is talking about the fans, then we don't know. We can speculate, and it wouldn't be crazy to think that some players could be upset with how things are going. The fact that, people like Dan Orlovsky saying these guys aren't being put in the proper position, they could be thinking the same thing. That's a possibility. I think that's definitely a possibility. All right, guys. Well, that's going to be it for this. I just wanted to come on here and talk with you guys for a little bit about this situation. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. I may do some lives more in the future. And, we'll see if anything else comes of this. If there is any more updates, if he shares anything else, then I will let you guys know. So feel free to subscribe and make sure the post notifications are turned on.